This is the Spycraft 101 podcast. Welcome to your clandestine classroom. This is episode number 210 of the Spycraft 101 podcast. My guest for today is Robert Kerbeck. Robert is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and has worked extensively in theater, film, and television, appearing in lead roles in major shows and earning several awards. He is a lifetime member of the Actors Studio. He's also the founder of the Malibu Writers Circle and the author of Malibu Burning, the real story behind LA's most devastating wildfire. His firsthand account of fighting the Woolsey Fire, which devastated the area surrounding Malibu, California, in November 2018. I invited Robert onto the podcast today to discuss his book, Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street, which was published in 2022. It's the story of his many years of work in corporate espionage, cold calling employees at major firms and convincing them to give out proprietary company information over the phone. Robert started out earning just $8 an hour in an apartment in New York City and ended up making over $2 million a year in Malibu. By the way, if you're looking for a new way to get friends and family as interested in history as you are, or if you want to learn something new and unexpected every month, then make sure to check out History by Mail. Every month, History by Mail will send you reproductions of famous and influential historical documents from American history. Accompanying the documents themselves are articles which put them in the context of their times and help you understand the impact they had on the course of American life. The topics are widely varied, so you're always learning something new across themes that include historic inventions, American wars, and foreign diplomatic relations. I'm really enjoying my own subscription because it's opened my eyes to historic events I knew nothing about. You can subscribe for yourself or gift a subscription at historybymail.com for as little as $6.50 a month. Just click the link in the show notes of this episode and use the discount code JUSTIN10 for a permanent 10% off your subscription. Robert, thanks for being here. It almost seems, honestly, just from that bio I just read, that you've lived 3 different lives, which is, kind of fitting for an actor who's taken on so many different character roles over the years.
Yeah, it's funny, and I feel like I'm starting a new one right now.
Oh, really? Okay, we'll have to get to that at the end then, certainly. I was amazed, just starting off with Ruse, that it sounds like your own family history is in some ways kind of predicated on a decades-long ruse by your own ancestors, right?
Yeah, I mean, first off, my great-grandfather came to America and repaired horse carriages. And then he saw the writing on the wall and he switched and became one of the first car dealers in Philadelphia. And my family to this day has car dealerships in the Philadelphia, New Jersey area. And so, basically, yes, I am the son of a car salesman, which should tell you how appropriate it was. I ended up as a corporate spy.
Wow, I love the story also about I think it was your grandfather had a relationship with a woman that he kind of had to keep secret for many, many years. Is that correct? Do I recall that? Was it your grandfather? I think it was.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. In all families, there's often, if not always, I'll use a big word, subterfuge, which is basically lying, right? And so often we don't know the lies, or maybe we know the lies, but we keep the lies hidden. We don't talk about them. And one of the things I did in this book was, I told all the stories and told the truth. And it's funny, Ruse, is a book about me lying for a living and becoming what the New York Post said was the world's greatest corporate spy. I don't know that I agree with that, but it was a nice thing for them to say. So here I've written this book about lying, about corporate spying, and yet everything in the book is true. And one of the things I wanted to do was make sure that everything that I wrote in the book was true. And so I exposed some family secrets. Some people in my family were really not happy with that, and that's one of the things about when you write a memoir. You really need to tell the truth, but sometimes other family members, they don't want that truth out there, or maybe they didn't know that truth, and so that can be painful for them. And so that was something about writing this book that surprised me. The reaction, in particular, one member of my family was very upset with me.
Okay, I see. That's interesting. Actually, I'm glad you said that because as I was reading through it, there were several times when I thought this is a very unflinching look at what Robert did and what he went through and that sort of thing, because, not every single thing in there reflects super positively, but you didn't shy away from talking about that at all, I didn't think.
Well, and thank you for saying that. I mean, I had to portray myself as I was. That is a complicated individual like many of us are, and so in one sense I'm doing good things for the planet, and in another sense I'm lying on the phone extracting information from corporations that I'm selling to their rivals, right? And a lot of people would go, wow, that's not right. Some people think it's cool. Some people think it's terrible, but, I've got to tell the truth in a memoir and then let the chips fall where they may. And you think about me, what you think about me.
Mm-hmm. Right. Totally agree. So I want to start off, Robert, with your acting career, which is not something that I normally cover here on the podcast at all, but it was nevertheless absolutely fascinating. It sounds like you had some really, really interesting moments, especially, when you were getting started in New York and then before moving out to California. So can you just talk about what it was like being like an up and coming young actor in the 80s and early 90s?
Yeah, well, I came from a family, like I said, car business. My father, I was the oldest son. My father expected me to take over the business. He had taken it over from his father, and his father had taken it over from his father, my great-grandfather. So it was just expected that I would take over the family business. And so when I kind of got bit by the acting bug in college and got really into it, my father was none too pleased, not very supportive or encouraging. But despite that, I moved from Philadelphia to New York, and I was somewhat lucky and fortunate to become a member of the Actors Studio pretty early on. And the Actors Studio has kind of been the training ground for some of the most famous film actors and stage actors in history. Al Pacino, Marlon Brando, Marilyn Monroe, Jane Fonda, Robert Redford, Sally Field. The list goes on and on and on with some of the best actors of film history. So that really helped me, and I got an agent and started getting jobs and started working, and then eventually that led me, my agent said, you got to go to Los Angeles, and so that took me to Los Angeles, and then I did a whole bunch of great TV shows. I killed George Clooney on a show called Sisters, because he had to go to some other show that you probably never heard of called ER. So if it wasn't for me, George, would never have had the career that he's had. And, so I had a lot of incredible experiences and some great roles. But all the time that I was acting, and even though I was getting jobs and good jobs, one of the things a lot of outsiders don't realize is that, to make a true living as an actor, you basically have to be a series regular on a TV show or a borderline movie star. That's how hard it is. Every check you get, not only do you lose a third or more in taxes, but you pay 10% to an agent, you pay 15% to a manager, you pay 2 or 3% to a publicist, you pay 2 or 3% to an attorney. I mean, it's really quite amazing. When you get this check, what at first seems like a good amount of money ends up being almost subsistence level paycheck. At least that's what it was for me. So I always needed a survival job. And, who stumbles into a career in corporate espionage? But that's what happened to me. And, and that's the story of Ruth.
Okay, I see. Yeah. So many people have something else going on in the background while they're continuing auditions and that sort of thing. That's always something that I've wondered about. Like if I look through someone's, filmography, for example, on IMDb, I'll see like a 3-year gap in between, some production. And I wonder, what were they doing all that time? Were they just resting on their laurels, or were they, working a normal job, as an upcoming actor, something like that? And I guess that is the case for a lot of people.
Yeah, they were going broke during those 3 years. That's what was happening.
Yep, I can understand that. Did you have any favorite roles in particular? I know you mentioned the one on Sisters already. Anything else that you really enjoyed or was especially like financially or personally rewarding for you?
Well, it's funny you say financially rewarding. I did an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine where I played a Cardassian, an alien. So I had to get all of the makeup, and I didn't realize how much time that makeup takes to put on and take off. It's hours and hours that you're in a chair. And so it ended up, we're shooting the show. And of course, I'm a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and they have, it's a union, they have rules. And I think at like 12 hours, you start getting overtime, and at 13 hours, 14 hours, it starts getting more. And then I think at 16 hours, you hit this thing called golden time. So for every additional hour you work after 16 hours, you get a whole nother day's pay.
Oh, wow.
And these Star Trek shows went 16, 17, 18 hours, in large part because of all of the makeup that had to be done. And so, a lot of Star Trek fans, they're really rabid fans. They're very loyal fans, Trekkies. They always would write me and they would ask me to sign my Star Trek card. And they'd say, what was your favorite moment on the show? What was your favorite moment on the show? And of course, they want to know a moment on the show. And I'm going, well, my favorite moment was when I got that paycheck.
Oh boy, I'll bet. Yeah, that does seem kind of brutal. Just watching like those sped up videos of people sitting in a makeup chair and they look totally different by the end, but just sitting there still and not being able to do anything, that seems like a real hardship, honestly, especially if it's on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, I forget. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, but I mean, it was hours. I mean, the number 4 hours comes into my head, but maybe maybe it wasn't 4 hours, maybe it was 2 hours or 3 hours, but it was a long time to get that makeup on.
Wow. Okay. I can see how you would really relish that paycheck from all of that preparation and then taking it all off and everything. I can imagine. So I do want to ask you, honestly, my favorite acting story that you had in the book probably was this workout video that you filmed in '94. Can you tell us all about that?
Yeah, well, I had just arrived in Los Angeles, and again, I'm a young actor. I'm, trying to make it. I'm trying to take any acting job that I can because, believe it or not, I didn't want to do the ruse job. I didn't want to lie on the phone and get this, extract this information or steal this information from individuals that we were then selling to their top rivals. And we'll get more into what that information was and why it was so incredibly valuable. And why corporate spying is alive and well today. But, I really wanted to get acting jobs, and my manager called up and he said, hey, I got this job, it's an exercise video. And I said, oh, no, I can't dance. I'm the worst dancer. He said, no, it's not dancing. It's a workout video. It's an exercise video for men. It's OJ Simpson. And I said, OJ Simpson, I'm old enough that I remember a little bit when he played football, but mainly I remembered him as like an announcer on Monday Night Football and his commercials. And I just thought he was cool, which is a pretty funny thing to say right now. Right.
Right.
So, my manager says, yeah, and it, pays good money and you get, an outfit and you get free sneakers. And that it's funny. The two things that sold me, one was OJ and the other was free sneakers because at the time my shoes had holes in them. My sneakers had holes in them. That's
my gosh.
That's how broke I was as an actor. And remember, I'm still only getting, maybe I wasn't at $8 an hour now. Maybe I was at $10 or $12 an hour, but we weren't getting rich from this job in the early days. It was just a survival job. He had no idea. I never had any idea it was going to turn into a job where I made millions of dollars a year. And anyway, so I go to the set to do this workout video with OJ, and I meet OJ briefly, and there are two beautiful women in it that are dancers, and the studio has a dance floor, and I'm introduced to someone who's the choreographer, and all of a sudden I begin to sweat, which I'm prone to do. And I'm like, and then all of a sudden the choreographer is snapping his fingers and he's lining everyone up and he does this sequence of moves and everybody's expected to do the moves. And the women, of course, do them perfectly. OJ's pretty good. A buddy of mine was in the video with me. He did it pretty well. And I was lost. I mean, I'm just the most spastic dancer ever. And the choreographer, I mean, he looked like, pale, as a ghost. At the same time, he was furious, and he was like, how did you get hired, and what are you doing here? And you're the worst And OJ stops the guy and says, oh no, Rob's dancing is so bad it's making me look good. Rob stays. And somehow that bonded me with OJ, and I learned over the years in Hollywood, the number one rule on a set is make the star look good. And OJ was the star of this exercise video. I think he was nervous that he wasn't going to look good. And so the fact that I was kind of, my dancing was pretty funky, and funky not in the good way, he wanted me around. And somehow the rest of the time, the shoot, he was my new best friend. And at one point he pulls me aside and he says, hey, Rob, you want to see the new pilot that I just shot for NBC? I think it's called Frogman. And I play a Navy SEAL who's a knife expert. You can't make this stuff up. So here he is just, days before the murders. and he's talking to me about the knife expert he's playing in this pilot for NBC.
Oh my gosh.
So you can imagine my shock, surprise when all of a sudden, whatever it was, however many number of days later, not many, where I'm sitting in my apartment in Santa Monica watching him on TV drive down the 405, trying to escape in the Ford Bronco in that infamous chase. That's, low speed chase. So yeah, so that was a pretty amazing story. And I'd like to say that OJ has never gone away. OJ has never left my life. I'm constantly reminded of OJ. People reach out to me about OJ. Not too many years ago, they did a TV show, a series about the whole thing, and they recreated the workout video in the series, which means an actor got hired to play me and do my bad dancing.
Wow. Was that the American Crime Story
I
season?
think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't watch it because I had lived it. My wife watched it and she called me up when that scene played and I fell on the ground laughing so hard.
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah, I do remember. I watched it and I really enjoyed it at the time, but I'm going to have to go back and rewatch again now just to see you, honestly, or see somebody portraying you anyway.
Yeah, for some reason I want to say it was episode number 9, but
okay, yeah, I'll look for it.
Yeah,
very cool, very cool. So fascinating career there, but as we mentioned, the title of the book is Ruse. So I want to wind the clock back a little bit from '94 anyway. Can you tell me when you first started this gig, like how it was presented to you? Was it just like what you thought was like a normal up and up kind of corporate job when you were first hired?
No, I moved to New York and, I didn't have any money. I was broke and I needed a job and I didn't have I wasn't a late night person. I've never been. So bartending was out. I didn't kind of have the patience to be a server like, a lot of actors in New York. Mm-hmm. So I didn't know what to do. I needed a job. And a friend of mine, really the only guy I knew in New York, his brother was my college roommate. He mentioned this job one day and then he shut up right away. Like he had made a mistake in talking about it. He'd been told, don't tell anybody what you do. And I said, whoa, what is this job? I'm broke, dude, help me out. And so he very reluctantly got me an interview. And I go to the Upper East Side to this doorman building. And for your listeners that may not know, Upper East Side is kind of old money New York. I go to a doorman building. I was living in Hell's Kitchen in a cave with 2 other guys, go up to the penthouse. And this woman ushers me into one of the nicest apartments I'd ever been in. And so right away I knew whatever this woman's business was, it was lucrative. And she had this very strange interview where she didn't tell me anything about the job. She just asked about my relationship with my father because she knew he was a car dealer and I had kind of walked away from that business and was giving me advice to, heal the relationship with my father. And it was very strange. And I left and, I never found out anything about what the job was and didn't think I got it. My buddy called and he said, look, you're hired, but don't get too excited because this job is so difficult. No one is able to do it. And I later learned that, she, first of all, she only hired actors because she felt actors good corporate spies for obvious reasons, but she only hired women. And my buddy was the first guy that she had ever hired. And she only hired me because he recommended me because she felt that women made better spies. And not long ago, I did an event with Valerie Plame, and your audience may remember Valerie was the CIA agent that was outed by the Bush administration back in the early 2000s. Mm-hmm. We were talking about women did women make better spies? And she said, of course they make better spies. And I asked her why. And she said, because women are better able to reflect and deflect, which was very interesting. And so she was basically saying women are much more comfortable with dropping any ego and just kind of being what they need to be to get along or get through any sort of situation. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting. I don't know that I agree because I was a pretty good spy, but Valerie knows what she's talking about. So I think she had a point that was well taken. And what was true, so I guess Valerie was right, is in the beginning, my buddy in the book, his name is Pax, he and I struggled with the corporate spying much more than the other women that our boss, this woman Leona, the one that had the super expensive apartment on the Upper East Side, the women that Leona hired and that trained Pax and myself, they were better at the job. They really were. And in the early days, one of the things we did in terms of corporate spying is at first we went out in person, right? So we would go to bars remember we're in New York, so we were really kind of focused on Wall Street firms in the early days. And we would go to, the US Open, and we would sneak into a box, or we'd go to a bar where we thought the Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan people hung out. But what we quickly learned is we could get more information using the anonymity of the good old-fashioned phone call, and then what in the book I call a ruse call. And so we would call people to corporations, and we would use our acting skills to impersonate real people within the corporation to get the individuals that we were talking to tell us anything and everything that we wanted to know. And we would often portray executives. And at first, the women were more successful at the job because they would play secretaries. So they would be a secretary in one department, or the assistant to the head of an area, and they would call the assistant to a different area, and they would have some sob story about how they lost a certain document, or they were getting, their boss was yelling at them and they needed help with something. And to my amazement, the assistants on the other end of the line would take pity, on my on my spy, my spy colleague, and they would get tremendous amounts of information. And as guys back in the day, most assistants, secretaries is what we called them back then, but assistants today, most assistants were female. And so we weren't able to pretend to be assistants. And so for a long time, we really struggled until one day I just said, you know what, I'm going to pretend I'm a senior executive. And if I'm a senior executive, I've got the right to have certain information. And by portraying a senior executive, I was able to use the cudgel of the corporate hierarchy to sort of intimidate people on the other end of the phone so that they went, oh my God, I've got a senior vice president of compliance on the phone. I've got the executive vice president of global operations on the phone. I've got the COO of XYZ division on the phone. Wow, I got to help this guy. This guy, there's an emergency, there's a crisis. And by helping him, it's going to be good for me and my career because I'm an up-and-comer, so I'm going to do whatever I can to help this person. Mm-hmm. And that's what we learned is that, one of the things corporations teach in their culture is what? To be a good teammate, right? And so when we're calling and I'm pretending that I'm a real person, and of course I'm going to pick a different office. So maybe I'm in the London office, and I'm calling New York, or I'm in the Chicago office and I'm calling Los Angeles because I don't want somebody to go, wait a second, you don't sound like, Joe Thomas. I know Joe. This isn't Joe, which by the way happened on occasion. But we would really do our best to choose individuals that we could call that it would be very unlikely that they had ever spoken to the person that we were pretending to be, but that they would know the name of the person we were pretending to be, because that's what we were banking on, is they would recognize the name, and that would give us the power that they would go, whoa, this is a senior executive I have on the phone. Boy, he sounds stressed out. He sounds like he's got a problem. Company's got a problem. I'm going to step in and be a good teammate and help out.
Okay, I see. Interesting. So when you were given these assignments, I take it that Leona had clients, like let's say, for example, some competitor of Goldman Sachs that wanted information. Did you know the full scope of this, or was this like a compartmentalized kind of thing, as they say in the intel community? Like, did you know why you were pursuing this information or who the client was?
In the beginning, we didn't know the clients because, of course, she wouldn't want us to know who her clients were because theoretically then we could steal her clients, right? And of course, she was very lucky in that sense that because we were actors, we weren't interested in stealing her clients or taking over her business. Now that changed later on when the money got big. And of course, that's a big part of the book, is when I go from working for Leona to starting my own firm. And then we kind of came to blows, so to speak, not actual blows, but yes, so we didn't know in the beginning who we were getting the information for, but later on we did.
Okay, I see. And like we mentioned right at the beginning, this you started at $8 an hour. Was there any commission or anything like that, or was this just an hourly job?
No commission at all. No.
Oh man.
No. And it was
Okay.
funny. One of our very first jobs is we were researching defense firms. So we were calling, and these are the names of the firms back in the day, but we were calling, Lockheed and Martin Marietta and all of these, major
Mm-hmm.
defense firms. And we were getting information on top secret programs. I remember back in the day, because this was right after Reagan and the whole Star Wars thing, and there was a lot of money put into defense. And it was just fascinating because, of course, we were clueless actors. We were getting $8 an hour. But, theoretically, the information we were getting, if I had, we were selling it to that, Lockheed's competitor. But if we had been selling that to Russia or China, those would have been treasonable events, and we could have gone to jail for the rest of our lives.
Wow. Yeah, that's heady stuff right off the beginning. And maybe you weren't, totally aware of what you were getting into with the defense contracting. But, I guess in the end, you were never jailed or anything like that for this. So it worked out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spoil it for anyone that wants to read the book or listen to it on Audible. But yeah, we had some serious close calls. And at one point, we were being pursued by every agency in the country with three letters in their names.
Mm-hmm. So did you work based off of some sort of prepared script for the most part, or were you just like as an actor, were you improvising on the call a lot of the times?
That's a great question, Justin. So a little bit of both. What I would always do is I would always write down on the left side of my piece of paper my name, as in the name that I was using, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would write Joe Thomas, Senior Vice President of Operations, and I might also write down Joe's phone number, the name of Joe's assistant. As cell phones became more and more prevalent, I would do my best to get Joe's cell phone. So if somebody said, "Hey, I just looked you up, Joe, and forgive me, I don't want to seem rude here, but just verify your phone number for me." And I'd go, "Hey, of course, no problem. You're doing the right thing. I appreciate that, And then I'd give them the phone number, and they go, "Oh, okay. Well, you know what? Let me ask you just one more question. Forgive me, Joe. I'm sorry. What's the name of your assistant?" And I'd go, "Oh, blah blah blah, Donna, blah blah blah." And he'd go, "Okay, God, sorry. What do you need? What do you need?" Right? So I'd have some of those kind of information that I had done research on, so that I was prepared to answer some of these questions, so I could continue the ruse, and that was very effective. But oftentimes, once we were into the phone call, it was full-on improvisation.
Okay, I see. This information that you were seeking just from reading the book, it seems like most of it was about, who was assigned to what team. It was like personnel matters essentially, and especially if you hadn't gotten an update recently. Is that primarily what you were looking for? Is personnel information for like employee rosters, that sort of thing?
It was, and remember, this is before LinkedIn. LinkedIn really took off after the crash of 2008, and so before 2008, 2009, if you wanted to know, it was very difficult to know who worked at a firm, who they reported to, who was on that person's team, and most importantly, who were the best people on every team and within every corporation. And even today, LinkedIn can't tell you that. And so corporate spying in that sense is still alive and well. And the analogy that I always use, because I'm a big football fan, is, you talk about the value of talent, right? And so Tom Brady, greatest quarterback in NFL history, wins a bunch of championships with the New England Patriots, becomes a free agent, and he goes to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And what happens to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? They win a championship, right? And so that shows you that if you can steal the Tom Brady from Goldman Sachs, or the Tom Brady from Apple, or the Tom Brady from Nissan, or the Tom Brady from Pfizer, and bring him to your company, or her to your company, it can make a tremendous difference in the bottom line. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the question becomes, well, how do you identify those people? How do you identify those rock stars? And that was what we were often hired to do. So we would first build the organizational chart of a department. So we would know who the head is, who the 8 to 10 to 12 people that reported to that person. Then we would get the 8 to 10, 12 people that reported to all of those people, and we would build out the organizational chart. And sometimes we would have charts that had hundreds of names. And then what we would do is we would attempt to rank those individuals. And something your listeners may not know, but corporations all rank their employees. And sometimes the way they do it is as simple as salary. If one person's getting more, generally they're better than somebody else. Not always, but generally. But there are also other metrics that corporations use to rank employees. So just to give a simple example, a sales department, right? In a sales department, people are ranked by their revenue, right? What they sell and how much they sell, right? And so we would obtain those numbers. So let's say, for example, there was a sales team of 30 people. Now, if you're the head of human resources and you're looking to hire somebody, or you're an executive recruiting firm and you've been hired by a major corporation to hire somebody for sales, everybody that comes in and interviews with you is going to tell you what? They're going to tell you, oh, I'm one of the best salespeople at XYZ, right? I'm number 2 on the team. Well, what we would do is we would find out the ranking. So we would know who was number 1, who was number 2, all the way to the bottom. And a lot of times the guy or gal going in the interview would be at the bottom of the list, right? Because they're not getting paid very well. They're afraid they're going to get cut because they're not doing very well. So they're looking for another job. And most of the people that are looking to poach talent, do you think they're looking to poach number 27 on the sales team, or are they looking to poach number 1, number 2, number 3 on the sales team? Right?
Yeah,
So
of course.
We would find that stuff out, and then we would cross-reference that with the salaries. We would obtain the salaries of the people. And so you would see, for example, and I'll just give you an example. Let's say it's a Goldman Sachs sales desk, right? And so that the number 1 salesperson made $6.7 million. The number 2 salesperson made $5.8 million. And then the number 3 salesperson made $485,000. And my client would go, whoa, that person is underpaid. Why are they underpaid? Most likely because they're a young person. They're a kid. They're a rock star. They're killing it. But nobody on the street knows that yet. So if my client can steal that person, think of the value that they're getting, because they're getting someone that is producing, basically, they're producing far more in terms of revenue to the firm than they're currently being compensated. And that's what, my clients would call that actionable intelligence. And that's what all firms are looking for, is they're looking for a way to identify top talent that ideally is not being paid top money, so that they can steal those individuals. And it makes a tremendous difference to the bottom line of a company. Going back to the Tom Brady example, right? So that was one of the big things that we were doing for our clients. And then later we got into some things where we were actually getting information on products and expansion and things that were really kind of nitty gritty, down and dirty.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering about that, because I was thinking as I was reading through this is that, the worst consequence for a company, like if you get on the phone and you get absolutely everything that you need, maybe more than once, the worst consequence is that their star employees receive some very competitive offers, and then they can choose of their own volition whether to go or not. So that's a pretty above board thing. Like, you just get a better competing offer and you leave. So I was curious, you talked about maybe prototypes or production plans or something like that. That also became a target later on beyond the employee rosters.
Yeah, but I mean, keep in mind, when we're getting these employee rosters, we're lying and we're presenting ourselves as
right.
individuals that we are not. So, I got to keep it real. And, we were one of my favorite ploys, and we all had favorite ploys, and we all had accents that we used. And mine was, "This is Gerhard calling from the office in Frankfurt, Germany. We have the European Union regulators here, and we need some information from the States," right? And you see how you laughed? That was the response 9 out of 10 times to the person.
Yeah.
They go, oh, Gerhard, buddy, whoa, you Frankfurt, wow, how's it going over there? Oh, hey, and again, Gerhard would be a real person. Maybe they were the head of compliance for Europe, or they were whatever, but they were a name that somebody would recognize, but they hadn't spoken to, and then they hear this crazy weird accent, and they're laughing, and as they're laughing, they're going, "What do you need, buddy? How can we help you?" And the Gerhardt ploy, or the German accent ploy, was so successful for me, whereas other people had different ploys. As I said earlier, one of the female spies, she was always using the beleaguered assistant with a really mean boss. And I could not believe it, but that ploy worked for her all the time. She would call another assistant, she would cry on the phone, she would say she was about to get fired, and the other assistant would say, "Calm down, it's going to be okay. What do you need? How can I help you?" And that other assistant would tell her anything and everything she wanted to know.
Yeah, I can totally see how that would work, and different strokes for different callers, of course. And it's great that you guys found something, or it's effective that you found something that works for each individual. Did you feel any? You've clearly highlighted that this is wrong in so many ways. Did you feel these moral or ethical qualms at the time? Did you ever think, I got to stop doing this, or maybe I should not start doing this to begin with? Anything like that?
Yeah, of course. In the beginning, we rationalized it. It was just a survival job. It was $8 an hour. Like you said earlier, much of what we were doing was helping people to get better jobs. So, coming from a business family, I said, okay, well, this is just the American capitalist system at work. But, I also was trying to get out of the job, and I was trying, and of course, another thing that I was doing was, well, I was just about to make it as an actor, and I was so close, and at one point, I think I did 4 pilots, and as I said earlier in your show, really the only way to, make it as an actor is you need to be a regular on a TV series. That's how you make the real money. And back in the day, you would shoot a pilot, and then the pilots all the executives would get together, and if NBC shot 50 pilots, but they only had room on air for 20, they would all get together in a room and they'd watch the 50 pilots, and they would choose the 20 that they thought were the best, and then the other pilots, were, on the trash heap and never seen. And so I did 4 pilots over a couple of year period, and none of the pilots in which I would have been one of the leads got picked up. And at that point, my acting career started to wane, and at the same time, the demand for the corporate intelligence, starting in the late 90s, around 97, it just went insane. And we went from $8 an hour, to 25 to 50 to 70 to 150. I mean, it was just incredible, the demand. That was when I stepped out on my own. I started my own firm. And at one point, I got so busy with work, a client called me, a new client, and they had this project. I said, I can't do the project. And they said, we have to have you do the project. I said, I can't. I have too much work. They said, suppose we paid you double. And I said, double? And they said, and we'll FedEx the check. It'll be there for you tomorrow. Imagine that.
Hard to turn down.
You're being paid double what you previously been being paid, and they sent you the check the next day. You hadn't even started the assignment.
Wow.
Obviously, I took that assignment, and that was the beginning of my income going exponentially, like doubling and tripling every year. And I hit $1 million a year. Then it was $1.5 million a year, and eventually over $2 million a year.
Wow. Okay. Amazing. And you were, at this point, you had your own firm. So you said you were like hiring employees and that sort of thing. It wasn't just you working the phone every day.
Yeah. I mean, eventually there was too much work for me to do. Pax, I hired Pax. He came to work for me. There was too much work for the two of us. Then I hired another guy, and eventually I got an office and had my own spy firm. And that was when we really started to do all kinds of different things, learning about products, corporate plans, corporate strategies, what we think of as more typical corporate espionage. But I also had crazy assignments too. One time I had somebody that had to have David Geffen's cell phone number. And this was, again, back in the day when, it's a little easier to get somebody's cell phone number today, but they were willing to pay me a tremendous amount of money to get his personal cell phone number,
wow.
which I did.
Wow.
And, all kinds of unusual assignments. We would be paid to find out donors. So For example, an art museum would want to know exactly how much money a rival museum, all the donors gave, because now they want to approach those donors
Of
for
course.
money. I mean, things that you would never think about in terms of valuable information, right? But again, knowledge is power, right? And so in the
Hmm.
case of this art museum, they wanted to raise more money. They wanted to build a new building. Their donors were not giving them enough money, and they said, "Okay, we need new donors. Let's steal donors from rival museums."
Wow. Cutthroat.
Yeah.
Amazing. So, Robert, how did you set your value? How did you set your pricing for this kind of the work? Because there is potential, like you said already, there's potential for a firm to earn millions of dollars or the museum to receive millions in donations. But how did you kind of value your work so that you kept all these clients coming in?
That's again another great question, Justin. It was very difficult to do it because it was changing so fast, and the way that, and I tell this to all business owners, and one of the things I think with the lessons from corporate spying, corporate espionage, is it's important for business owners to be aware of it, especially small business owners, because you work hard to create a business, start a business, and yet people can steal. Even as simple as oh, I'm going to copy that person's website because I like their website, or whatever things you're doing well, people try to steal it. So I think that was something that I learned early on. There is a lot of value in things that you don't realize are so valuable. And like I said, going back to that art museum example, like when they hired me, I had no idea how to price that assignment. I had no idea what the value was. That call kind of came out of the blue, and we would get calls that came out of the blue all the time. We would get calls from companies all over the world. I would get calls from companies, from people that did not speak English, that had heard of me from someone and wanted to hire me.
Hmm.
And this is going back some years, so we didn't have Google Translate running around, so
Uh,
it was very challenging. Very challenging. One of the things I say, I was doing a podcast, and interviewer asked if most corporations hired spies, and I said no, most corporations don't. All corporations do. And I think that's something that people listening might not be aware of, but that every corporation is hiring spies every day. And most times they do it through an intermediary, because for obvious reasons they don't want to hire me directly, because if I get caught and then I were to say, oh yes, I met with the COO of XYZ firm, or the EVP at XYZ firm, that firm could get into big trouble. So they hire me through the consulting firm, or they hire me through the executive recruiting firm, or they're hiring spies through an intermediary, but they're hiring spies nonetheless.
okay. Yeah. Yeah. That certainly makes sense. You have a very, very unique skill set, as do many, spies, former spies, government spies, that sort of thing, and extremely high demand, when those skills are used correctly, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's been happening now, and this is slightly different, but we're seeing all these ransomware attacks, right? And the ransomware attacks are almost always initiated by a ruse phone call, or
Hmm.
what people sometimes call a social engineering phone call,
Hmm.
right? Where you're using trickery, subterfuge, to get people to tell you things that you should not know. And so in most of these ransomware attacks, there is someone like me, and we never did this kind of stuff. Again, I drew the line at, I never stole, financial information. I never traded on any of the information I got, as in, insider trading, because I knew that was a big red flag. Even Martha Stewart went to jail for that. But these ransomware attacks are using the same techniques that we used with rusing to basically get information on networks, on passwords, on firewalls. And then the hacking component, because these are usually teams, and then the hackers on this team, after the social engineer gets what they need, then the hackers do what they do, and then of course the firm is in big trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely agree. And a lot of preparation on the part of the ruser really is incredibly valuable. And I can totally see that because this amateurish stuff can get, shrugged off pretty quickly. But I mean, ransomware, people are falling for it. Companies are falling for it every single day. So there's a lot of professional teams out there worldwide right now, I have to imagine.
Oh my gosh, it's a growth industry, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Ransomware attacks is a growth industry. I get hired now to talk to companies, talk to organizations. I just had an organization reach out to me to do a presentation next April here in California. And, one of the things is corporations have spent so much time and money protecting their networks. Great. Their firewalls, their servers, all of that stuff. Great. But they have spent almost no time and money educating employees. And, if I can get to an employee inside your firm who will tell me anything and everything I want to know, all of that money you spent on protecting the hardware, the technology, is almost worthless because now I've got a human being that is working with me to circumvent all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fast changing world. I mean, some things I guess don't ever change, but yeah, a lot of people are just not what would be the word? I guess literate to this type of threat, and especially with a lot of automation, if you're sending out 1,000 calls a minute and that sort of thing, you're absolutely going to find somebody, probably several times a day that's unfortunately going to fall for these things.
Yeah, and something that we were really good at is follow me on this one. And this was a very successful ploy. So we would call someone, we would get them to believe that we were who we were, and if I felt that the hook was really well set with this individual, like, man, they really are buying everything that I'm selling, I would get all the information I could from them, everything I could from them. And then at a certain point, they often would go, well, I don't know the answer to that question. And I don't know the answer to that other question. So there were maybe a couple things they just didn't know. They were willing to tell me, but they just didn't know. I'd say, who would know that information? And they'd go, oh, Bob over who runs such and such. Oh, he'll know that. I say, do you know Bob? Oh, yeah, I know Bob really well. Can you do me a favor? Put me on hold and call Bob, and will you ask him that question? And ask him this other question too, because I need the answers to these questions. And so now that person would put me on hold. They would call over. They're obviously an internal employee. They know the guy they're calling. The guy is going to tell them whatever it is that they're asking. So I've now turned this employee into my own internal mole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And again, same thing with the ransomware.
Unwitting recruit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, same thing with the ransomware attacks. That's what happens a lot of times, is that the initial social engineer ruser is turning some low-level customer service person that they've gotten on the phone, they've gotten to believe that they're this executive whose laptop has fallen into the pool, or whatever ploy that they're using as to why they need to reset a password and whatnot. They're basically turning that person into their spy, and that can compromise an entire corporation's network and ability to function, costing that corporation tens of millions and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. Think about that.
Incredible stuff. Absolutely amazing. Yeah, the consequences for a lot of this stuff, I don't think people necessarily realize how far it can spin out of control once you're kind of on the inside there.
No, and I've had clients that, they reached out to me and they said, hey, Robert, we're thinking about hiring you. How much should I hire you? Oh, boy, that's too much. And one of them was I don't know if chain of hospitals is the right way to say it, but, that's what it was, like a medical corporation. And they got hacked and they were shut down. Doctors, were writing handwritten notes because they couldn't do anything on the computer because the computers, they were locked out. They basically couldn't do surgeries. They couldn't take appointments. I mean, not only is that financially damaging, but you think about your reputation as well, right?
Oh, right.
And of course, then they came to me, and it was too late. What am I going to do now? It's like you've been, and the amount of money, I mean, it's ludicrous. It's like one whatever millionth of what they lost in terms of what they could have paid me to do seminars and presentations to train their employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, it's unfortunate if they don't do that kind of a hospital of all places not being concerned about preventative care, I guess you
Yeah,
could say.
yeah,
That's pretty funny.
yeah. Very good point. Well said.
Well, that's unfortunate. Yeah, and it once it gets to that point, honestly, from what I've seen, I'm not an expert by any means, but with this ransomware, the best solution is simply to pay as fast as you possibly can, because there's really, once you've kind of crossed that threshold, there's nobody that can really save you from that once they're inside and they've locked down all of your systems and encrypted all of your data that you need every day. So it's unfortunate, but yeah, people have to be switched on to this kind of stuff and constantly vigilant, because it feels like the full spectrum of completely amateurish attempts are made all the way up to these highly professional, well prepared teams. And I recall there's been two times in my personal life when I've been fairly close to being scammed. One of them had nothing to do with me; it was a person impersonating me, without my knowledge. And another one, I was on the phone with someone for about 2 minutes before the red flag started to go up, and I like to think that I'm about as alert and switched on as you can be to that kind of thing, but they spoofed my bank's number, and they had an American accented person calling me and reading off of a well prepared script, and they got nothing in the end. But I have to admit, when I picked up the phone, I did not think I was about to be scammed. So it's effective. It's certainly effective.
Yeah. Well, and good for you for admitting that, because most people won't admit that. And
yeah, I mean, I had grudging respect for that person, honestly, because they did their homework.
Right. And so many times, I have people say to me, "Oh, I would never fall for this," and "Oh, I would never give up information." And I have to tell you, when I would make a ruse call, my percentage of success with the ruse call was not 90%, not 95%, not 98%. It was 99.999999% of the time I got the information my clients asked me to get.
Wow. Yeah, they were up against a real professional,
Yeah.
no doubt about it, and didn't even realize it. Of course, that was the kind of the whole point of it. So did you ever, in all of this time, did you ever come close to anything like arrest, prosecution, or, investigation, by even like a private investigation firm hired by a corporation, anything like that at all?
Yeah, there were many times where, like the individuals at a particular company that we were calling to get information from would get on to us or get on to me, and they would, try to spread the alarm bell, or, sound the alarm bells. And one of the ploys we had, we called this the putting someone to sleep ploy. So, let's say I call you, and let's just say you're not going for what I'm selling. You don't believe it. You say, hey, I'm blah blah blah, and you're very suspicious. And so what I realize is you are not going to give me the information. So, but what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to sound the alarm bells. So we had this ploy, and what I would do is I'd say, "Hey, Justin, it's okay. I want you to send me an email. I want you to send me an email from a company server, so I know exactly." No problem, Justin. No problem. I will send you the email. I'm off site at the moment, but I will send you the email. Give me 60 minutes. You will have an email. Everything will be in there, will be explained. But well, yes, that's what I want. I need that email. No problem. I will send it to you. I will have it to you within an hour. Great. Okay. Look, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to give you a hard time here, but I just need to see that email. I'm going to get it to you. And worst case scenario, if I get slammed, I got a couple of the fires I'm fighting here, but by the end of the day, you will have it guaranteed. Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, great. Okay, yeah. So I'll have it by the end of the day, 100%. 100%. Okay. So we end the call. Now you're waiting for an email that's never going to come. Right? But what have I done? I bought myself the rest of the day to find someone else within your firm that is going to give me the information. And guess what? I'm going to find that person, and I'm going to get that information. And I've put you to sleep so that you're not sending out a company email. You're not calling the head of compliance or security or whatnot saying, "Look, we've got somebody trying to penetrate the firm. We should do X, Y, and Z." Funny sidebar, we would often, if we found out a company had sounded the alarm, then we would call somebody like you, Justin, and we go, "Hey, Justin, this is, Rick Johnson in compliance. I don't know if you've heard, but people are trying to penetrate the firm." And you would say, "Oh my God, they just called me." And and Pax and I would work in tandem. So like if he got, we called it busted, when somebody, so let's say Pax called me up and said, "Hey, this guy Justin busted me. He's the guy that's got the information," and then I would call you and I'd say, "Hey, Did this guy just call you? Did he ask for this? Did he sound like that? Okay, great. That guy's been calling a lot of people. What was he asking you for? Oh, that, okay. I need to know exactly what he was asking you for. I need that information because I need to make sure that we know exactly what he was after so we can make sure nobody gives him that information.
Oh my gosh, incredible.
And now you would tell me that information because how would I know that this guy had just called you, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So it was phenomenal how we would use anything that had happened to our advantage. And we would always do a lot of research before we made a call. So I would know if the sports team in your city won the day before, if they lost. I would know if there was some terrible accident on the freeway to work that morning. You know, whatever I could find about your company, your city, your office, your division. You know, did you guys release earnings? Were the earnings good? Were the earnings bad? You know, we would do that kind of homework because we were professional spies. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, you know, you'd be like, how would this guy know that the traffic on the, 405 was so bad today? You know, all of these things, you know, that it just makes it seem as though you absolutely are who you say you are. And so there's no reason to doubt me, none whatsoever. And so therefore, not only are you willing to tell me anything you know, but you're willing to do my bidding for me and start calling around to other people and get more information for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Amazing. So, Robert, that brings up a great point, actually. With the amount of preparation that you would do before these calls, what was like a typical time frame from you from taking on a client to actually delivering what they wanted? Like, was it ever same day or anything like that? Or were you like, all right, we'll have it by, 2 weeks from now, something like that?
I mean, it could be same day. That wasn't too often, the case because usually we'd get hired by a corporation and they'd want us to spy on their 5 biggest rivals or their 10 biggest rivals or their 8 biggest rivals. And they would want a lot of information, and those projects take time, So, I would say an average project was anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months.
Okay. Yeah, that's understandable. Wow, fascinating. So, Robert, you're clearly very, very good at this, and you had a lot of experience, and you're bringing in a lot of money. But I know that you've moved on from that now. So, what led you to close your research firm in the end?
Well, I was always, morally conflicted about the job. At one point, my kid heard me on the phone and said, "Dad, are you a hacker?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm not a hacker. I get this information and it helps, people, get better jobs and da da da." And they said, "But you're lying," And I said, well, yeah, I am, And they said something like, "Well, that's wrong." And I said, "You're right," And it was in that moment that like the truth really hit me through my child's eyes and words, and then I was like, "Okay, I got to get out of this job."
Yeah,
and then I did. I got out of the job, and I kind of had the proverbial midlife. One day, I was kind of so down in the dumps that I wrote a suicide note, but it wasn't me contemplating committing suicide. It was through the voice of this character. And I had been an English major in college before I became an actor. And so I wrote this short story, which turned into a book, which was really about as bad as a book could be. But there was something about the story that was good. Like the writing was really rough, but the story was there. The story, the energy, the storytelling was there. And so it made me decide to improve my writing. And I started going to writers' conferences and taking writing classes. And to my surprise, started writing short stories. I always loved reading short stories, and my short stories started getting published, and then more got published. And then in 2018, we had this terrible fire here in Malibu that burned down the half of the town, the western part of the town. And of course, we just had a fire earlier this year that burned down the eastern part of the town.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
LA Times reached out because they had heard about me through some blah, blah, blah. And they said, "Hey, will you write an essay for us about the fire?" Which I did. And then that turned into a book called Malibu Burning. And that book did really well. That led, to the next book deal for Ruse. And that book has done well and has been optioned now for film and TV. And now, I've got a new book that I've just finished, which is my first fiction, and it's a thriller set in Malibu.
Oh, very cool. Do you have like a publication date for it already?
I don't. I don't have a publication date. One of the things a lot of people don't know about the literary world is it moves incredibly slowly. It's mind-boggling to me, but generally from when you finish a book to when it's on the shelves is around 18 months.
Oh my gosh.
I know, right? But
That is, yeah.
yeah, I mean, and most of that is about getting the book lined up for success in terms of the marketing of the book,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really, I think, where most of the time involved. It's not like editing or copy editing or creating a book cover. I mean, those things take a little bit of time, but no, with traditionally published books, the process is slow, and I think it's really mainly about making sure that the book is set up for success in terms of sales.
Okay. Yeah, that certainly makes sense, and I'm excited about it. Honestly, like I really love your work, and I know that you've got some really interesting things to say. And sounds like you know Malibu really, really well at this point too. So I'm sure that's going to be an exciting book. Do you have a title? Can you tell us the title already?
The title, I'm going to hold back on the title because
Okay,
I
sure.
love the title so much, and one of the things that's funny is you cannot copyright a title, so
Hmm.
so that anybody can use anybody else's title. Like I could write a book and call it The Godfather.
Hmm.
Now, of course, I couldn't write a book called The Godfather and have Vito Corleone as a character, unless, I guess you could get away with it if it was like some sort of satire. But in general, you can't copyright titles. So I'm going to keep my title secret for a little
Okay.
while because I really like it.
I can't blame you. Most of my author guests, I would say the majority of them are keep things close to the vest until like it's really, really like 2 weeks away from publication. It seems like a lot of them don't even like to tell me what they're writing on next. I found.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I
Well,
think
very cool.
I think one of the things about Ruse that I think the compliment that meant the most to me when readers say this or when some of the reviews said this is that even though Ruse is nonfiction and everything is in it is true, is that it reads like a spy novel.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Well, that's nice of you. I appreciate that. And so the new book, even though it's fiction, it's a thriller. So it's like a spy novel, and except I got a couple murders in this one.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that. So now that you've actually finished writing that one, are you going to be working on another book after that, to get that one in that process as well? Or are you moving on to something else?
Great question. I think that this book will be a series, and I've already got the second book sort of outlined. I'm going to kind of wait to start writing the second book until I do have a publication date for the first book, because that'll give me a sense of when I have to turn in a second book. And in the meantime, there's a funny story. I haven't acted for many, many years, and a friend of mine is a sort of a well-known actor. He's done a number of big TV series. His name is Michael Harney. He was star of Deadwood and Orange is the New Black, and he was a star of the Bradley Cooper movie A Star is Born, and he's a wonderful guy, and he's also a playwright. And he wrote a play, and he knows I'm a writer. We've been friends for many years. We did a movie a long time ago together, and he asked me to read his play called Danny Boy, give him notes. And so I read the play and emailed him some notes. And one of the notes I wrote at the bottom, I said, hey, if I had still been acting, I would have thrown my hat in the ring to play the part of the older brother to the lead character. And I emailed Michael. 5 seconds later, my phone lights up with Michael's name, and he says, hey, did you say you wanted to play this part? I said, no, I don't want to play the part. I just was saying if. He said, no, the second I got it, you're perfect for this part. You have to play this part. I said, no, I don't want to play.
Wow.
Long story short, Michael said, well, just do a reading. Just come and do a reading of it. So I went and did a reading of it. And he said, just do one more reading. And, and eventually we did a reading, and long story short, I am now acting in Michael's play, which is opening in Hollywood in mid-September.
Oh, terrific. Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah.
I love live theater. Honestly, huge fan of it myself, so I'm really looking forward to that. Robert, do you have like social media pages or a website or anything if anybody wants to follow along the progress and look for the novel announcement coming soon?
Oh, sure. Well, that's kind of you. Obviously, I've got my website, which is just my name, www.robertkerbeck.com. I'm very active on Instagram and, fairly active on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. And I always say, if anybody wants to reach out, I respond. I don't have, there's no assistant. There's no filter. So if you email me or you contact or you direct message me, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has. I joke that you're looking to transition into a new career as a corporate spy. I can give you a few tips on that. I can tell you there's a lot of money to be made, and I'm not doing it anymore. So, if I can help somebody else, transition into that career, I'm happy to do it.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate it, Robert. And everyone, if you want to read, of course, as always, there's so much of this story that we have not had the time to discuss here today. And you can learn a lot more about the world of theater and film production if that's of interest to you, aside from all of the espionage aspects as well. So the book is called Ruse: Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street by Robert Kerbeck. Robert, I really appreciate your time. We're going to link up your website and everything in the show notes of this episode for anybody who wants to follow along. And this has been a great call, and I'm looking forward to what you work on next.
Oh, thank you, Justin. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Take care. If you're interested in more of Spycraft 101, look for my page on Instagram at Spycraft 101. You can also find more great articles on my website, spycraft101.com. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll stick around because there's lots more to come.
Disclaimer. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The stories and statements expressed herein are experiences and opinions. They may not reflect the views of the host or the production studio. It's okay if you disagree with our content. No piece of media is right for everyone. If you love Spycraft 101, please check us out online, on Instagram, on YouTube, and especially on Patreon. Thank you for listening.